Hello and welcome to the TF1 show. I am your host, Tinus Ferreira, and I am here to be the life raft that navigates you through the relentless river rapids that is the world of F1. Now let me tell you, I am so excited for this coming week since if the last couple of weeks in F1 had to be a color, it would be that exact color of beige that you get on a hearing aid. So let's just say that we've been in a bit of a limited period in getting interesting F1 news. But this week's it's all going to change since it is officially the week where most of the teams unveil their challenges for the 2020 season. So today I'm going to take you all through a couple of the cars that I'm most interested in seeing and talk about what we can potentially expect over the next couple of days. So we kick off bright and early tomorrow morning where Ferrari will unveil their challenger for the upcoming season. And I have to say, I'm very excited to see what the problem children of F1 is going to show us, because there were a couple of obviously shortcomings on their car during last year's season, most notably the fact that they struggled for the most part with peak downforce due to their front wing concept and due to the fact that they typically had a bit of a low drag car, which meant that they were much faster in the straight line, but then struggled quite often to warm up the tires and to prevent the tires from wearing out too quickly. So we've heard a couple of rumors about the Ferrari car over the last couple of months, and I know, and you all know, that the Italian press, when it comes to Ferrari, it's a bit of a soap opera when it comes to them, where it's always this rumor or that rumor, or someone overheard this engineer say this to his or her friend, and then it explodes into the media, and then before you know it, we know all sorts of random things about Ferrari that may or may not necessarily be true. But, keeping that aside, we heard rumors over the last couple of months that Ferrari's engineers weren't that impressed with the new car that they prepared or that they were building, that they ran simulations and they did their tests, and the data effectively showed that it wasn't looking that great for them. Now, within what parameters or within what sort of perspective you should take that, I don't know. They might be talking about the color scheme for all we know, but in any case, so we heard those rumors about the car initially, but then more recently it came out that actually they were able to address some of these problems and that now they feel a bit better about where the overall performance of the car is sitting. I guess, and I promise you that we'll probably have to take all of this information with a massive pinch, not even a pinch, a handful of salt, because what tends to come out in these media rumors and what actually turns out to be the case is more often than not completely different. So I think the main things we need to look out for when we look at the new Ferrari that comes out on the Monday morning is, have they made any changes to the fundamental aerodynamic philosophy of the car? Did they move from a more outboard loaded to an inboard loaded front wing? Things like that. Have they changed their front wing concept is obviously the most obvious one. They were looking and during the Abu Dhabi tests last year of maybe changing some of their engine exhaust configurations to maybe gain some aerodynamic benefit there. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see if Ferrari was able to make the necessary aerodynamic changes to help with their peak downforce issue and to maybe bring them a bit closer to Mercedes in terms of race pace, because that's where last year we saw more often than not them struggle against the silver cars, even after putting even after a very good qualifying performance by the red team. So I think those are obviously the key things to look out for on the car itself. But then in addition to that, it's going to be very interesting to see, and I guess we'll only really see this come out in Australia, but whether they've made any progress or whether they've regressed in terms of their engine power. Now, the technical directors and all of the controversy around the Ferrari engine has been well documented and well discussed even on this podcast. And I think a lot of us are interested to see whether they actually make some more power gains over the winter. and whether they actually stagnated a bit after the technical directives that was issued over the last couple of races of the 2019 season. Now, for Ferrari, we also heard a couple of instances of a couple of rumors where they say they're basically changing the whole internal combustion portion of the engine with new cylinder technology and all sorts of fun and wonderful things. Again, we'll probably only see the fruits of that if there is anything in Australia, but I think definitely something to look out for. Now, to summarize Ferrari in general, I think the launch is always with Ferrari is going to be quite an exciting event. I think a lot of us are going to be super interested in seeing what they came up with. And then obviously with all of the pressure on the team and on the drivers to win the world championship after so many years of being unable to do so, I think it's going to be fascinating to see whether the team was able to address some of the things that held them back during the 2019 season. Now on the Tuesday, we're going to see 2 car launches, and both of these launches I'm actually extremely interested in watching and following. The first being Renault and the second being Red Bull Racing. Now let's maybe talk about Renault first, because I think this is going to be a bit of a make or break year for the Renault team, especially when it comes to their performance relative to the other midfield teams like McLaren, like Racing Point, like Haas even, depending on what they come up with. But I think Renault is definitely on a bit of a crossroads in terms of whether they're going to stay in Formula One or not even considering all of the sort of political goings on behind the scenes in the company. But I think we can all say that what happened last year to the Renault team was a big disappointment for them after finishing, I think, best of the rest in 2018. Being soundly beaten by McLaren last year probably wasn't what the team wanted. And now over the last couple of months, they made quite a few changes in terms of their technical team and the sort of head designers and lead engineers that are going to be heading up the Renault F1 program. Now, obviously, I don't think it was, these new appointments were in time to really have a massive impact on the 2020 car, but it's going to be interesting to see whether they were able to learn from some of their mistakes last year and some of the, let's say, fundamental issues that the car had, and whether they can bounce back and really challenge McLaren and maybe get a bit closer to the front 3 teams. Now, the other element of this year's Renault Formula One campaign, if you can call it that, is the driver pairing that's changed. So we now have Daniel Ricciardo, who remains from last year, and with the new joiner Esteban Ocon in the seat next to him. So Ocon, I think, is going to be a very interesting prospect. He gave Sergio Perez a lot of headaches back in the Force India days a couple of years ago. And it's going to be very interesting to see, firstly, if he can compete with Ricciardo, and if he is able to compete with Ricciardo, how well those two are able to work together and whether they can maintain a positive working relationship, especially in a team that we've seen over the last couple of months drop the ball a bit in terms of race management, in terms of making sure they maximize their results when they have the opportunities. So all of these things need to come together for the Renault team, and I guess it all starts with the car that they're going to be revealing on Tuesday. So I'm very excited to see what Renault comes up with, whether they have made any changes in their design philosophy, because I think some changes were necessary or are going to be necessary for them to make the required progress this season. Now, the other team, Red Bull Racing, also launching on Tuesday. I think for them, the key is going to be ensuring that the car is up and running from the first race, because over the last couple of years, they've had a bit of an issue where they start the year very slowly, and then by the time they've caught up to Mercedes and Ferrari and the front runners, they've effectively lost out on too many points over the first couple of races, which means that they're not really in championship contention. And I think this is something, now that Verstappen has this new juicy long-term contract, that Red Bull will want to address and make sure that Verstappen is up there competing with the Mercedes like he was at the end of last year from the first race. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think with Red Bull, typically, given that they came on so strong at the end of last year with their design approach and with how good their car was in different circuits, I think we're probably going to see a bit more of an evolutionary approach to their design from last year. Maybe add a few more bits and bobs here and there on the barge boards and things like that. And I think they're going to want to really challenge Mercedes, and even Ferrari, depending on, what the problem children come up with, in Australia and then in the races thereafter. So I think that's the key thing we want to look out for. And then obviously with a designer like Adrian Newey, you never know, there might be some surprise that you didn't notice before, or we might come up with some sort of trick with the aerodynamics that might steal a bit of a march on the other team. So very excited to see what Red Bull comes up with. Cool. Now the next team, and this team is launching on Wednesday, that I'm very interested in is McLaren. And I've sort of been referencing their battle with Renault a bit earlier in the episode. But McLaren made it very clear at the end of last season that they are aware of some of their shortcomings of the car, and they are going to work extremely hard to try and find some of the, smaller details and sort out some of the smaller details for them to make that next step into chasing the front running team. So just for me personally, interested to see what those areas were, whether we're going to be able to identify when they launch the car on Wednesday which areas they did spend some time working on, because obviously they had the similar front wing approach to what Ferrari had. So it's going to be interesting to see how they went about solving some of the inherent shortcomings of that approach versus how Ferrari went about solving those problems, and to see whether McLaren can actually now get into that sort of space and refine, let's say, their aerodynamic approach and their overall car design philosophy into really building into a potential podium scoring car this season. Now, obviously, I think all of this has to be balanced with the next year's regulations, the 2021 regulations that are obviously going to have a massive impact on the teams. And I think most teams are definitely going to come up with some sort of parallel running program where they have a portion of the team working on this year's car and another portion working on next year's car to make sure that neither one of the balls are dropped. So it's going to be fascinating as well to think about how, if Renault or McLaren maybe don't do as well as they expected at the beginning of the season, how quickly they'll decide to shift focus to next year's car and to do something similar to what McLaren did in 2018, where they effectively finished the year as the second slowest car on the grid and just stopped development on that car at all, or on a total level, and completely focus on the next year's car, basically. So some interesting things to look out for on McLaren. And then lastly, and I guess you'll all be expecting this, the team that I'm interested in seeing is Mercedes, and they're revealing their car on Thursday. So it's quite a packed week of car reveals, which I'm, as you can tell, very excited about. But I digress. So the Mercedes, I think, is probably, I would imagine, over the first couple of races especially, that car will still, I think, be the one to beat, given that, from what I understand, they've effectively stopped the majority of the development on last year's car by the time they delivered the Hockenheim upgrade in the middle of 2019. And I think James Allison, the technical director of Mercedes, admitted and said that they already started work on this year's 2020 car at the end of 2018. So it's been more than a year of development coming into this year's car. And I'm fascinated to see if they come up with anything interesting. Obviously, they have a bit of a contra aerodynamic design approach to what Ferrari has. And it's sort of widely considered the more tricky philosophy to make work, which is why teams like Renault and some of the other teams that tried a philosophy similar to Mercedes last year struggled a lot and weren't able to figure things out, because apparently it's a much more difficult and more peaky aerodynamic philosophy to figure out. So I think a lot of Mercedes' work over the last couple of months probably went into sorting out a lot of this peaky downforce and sort of unpredictability of their car. And then in addition to that, maybe making their car a bit less draggy to nullify or to at least minimize their disadvantage to Ferrari, especially during qualifying, which has probably, if you look back over the last year, that's probably been their biggest Achilles heel was those qualifying Saturdays. So I think those are probably going to be the two main things that Mercedes will focus on. We'll be interested to see what they do come out with. That, and then also the engine, where for the first time in this turbo hybrid era last year, it was widely considered that Mercedes did not have the best engine on the grid, and they actually lost ground to the Ferrari teams. And then also that the Renault and the Honda engines caught up quite dramatically. Now, there were some whispers, or even since I think about June, July last year, that the engine team in Brixworth found massive gains in the 2020 engine, and that they weren't ready to unleash this new engine during the previous season, but that they're actually going to be ready for this coming season. So I think that's something to look out for. You never know. Mercedes might turn up with a bomb in the back of their cars, and all of a sudden it'll be 2014 and 15 all over again. You can never discount those guys. They've just been so good and so strong at maintaining their lead out front. And I think their rate of development, their rate of development might not be as noteworthy, let's say, as someone like Red Bull, but you just see Mercedes constantly finding those incremental gains and adding little bits here and adding little bits there, and just making sure their car remains quick. Doesn't matter at what point of the season they are in. And then obviously, if they do happen to be out in front again at the beginning of the season, you can bet your house on the fact that as soon as they feel they have a sufficient enough lead, they will halt all work on the 2020 car and immediately switch all of their focus and their might on the 2021 car. So, I guess lots to look forward to in terms of launch week, and for the top three teams, especially, to see what they come up with and how they manage to hoodwink the others. Now, I'll just quickly skim over, when the launch dates of the other teams will be. So, AlphaTauri, previously known as Toro Rosso, will also reveal their car on the Thursday. The Racing Point and Williams will reveal their challenges on February the 17th. I think the Racing Point specifically is going to be interesting to see, given all of the financial difficulties they had in developing last year's car. So let's see if they can come up with something a bit more competitive this year, now that they, for the first time in a couple of seasons, have a bit of financial security thanks to Daddy Stroll. Now, on February 19th, which is the day I think testing starts, we'll see the Haas and Alfa Romeo challenges. So, I think lots to look forward to. Always interested to see what the different teams come up with. Sometimes one of the smaller teams actually steals a bit of a march on the big ones and comes up with a bit of a clever aerodynamic trick or a clever suspension trick or something along those lines. And then before you know it, the top teams have also adopted that one and basically nullified the advantage that the smaller teams used to have. So, a very exciting time, for all of us in Formula One. And, please join me and follow all of the news that's going to come out, over the next couple of days. So there you go. Those were my thoughts on the cars we'll see over the next, not 48 hours. What's 48 times 5 times 2, 3? Over the next couple of days, I guess. Please, share your thoughts with me if you want on Twitter, where my handle is @DF1Show, or on Instagram, where my handle is @TheTF1Show, and let me know if you think everything I just said is more factually incorrect than a recently edited Wikipedia page. Now, I'm always happy to debate it out. Please also leave a rating and subscribe if you're so inclined. I can't wait for things to kick off properly over the coming weeks, and hopefully I'll be back with weekly episodes soon. Bye!